Good morning, good afternoon, good evening around the world. My name is Doug Brunke. I'm the founder and CEO of Global Chamber. We mainly help companies in their global expansion. Exporters find clients, investors find great investments. We surround them with extraordinary business resources. One of the resources that is in our ecosystem are global economic development leaders. And we have typically done women in global leadership programs that have been regionally focused. One of the last ones was Salt Lake City, and the previous one was Los Angeles and Tucson, Arizona combined. An interesting combination, but regionally kind of close. We have done mixed conversations before, but we've never done one on economic development and picked out global economic development leaders for the discussion. So we're really looking forward to seeing how today goes, because that's exactly what we've done. And my partner in crime in terms of moderation will be Barb Lemieux. She's the president and CEO at New North. If you're not familiar with New North, it covers about 18 counties within the state of Wisconsin, USA. And what's really interesting, I think, about Wisconsin, and Barb, let me know how you either agree or disagree, but some of the exporters in Wisconsin are really extraordinary. Some of them in business for many years, some really old families, the Johnson Wax and Johnson Bank, maybe, I think they're both out of Wisconsin, both amazing and extraordinary companies and exporters. And undoubtedly you get your hands involved with a lot of different really interesting companies. So thank you for co-moderating today and looking forward to a great discussion. What comments would you like to make to kick us off?
Yes, good morning, Doug, or good afternoon, good evening. This is a global event, right? So time around the world. I want to thank you so much for asking me to be the moderator of this very, very distinguished panel. I think our viewers will receive very insightful comments about how each of our panelists are dealing with certain things. And the name of the game is how we all learn from each other. So I'm excited to get the panel kicked off after your introductions, Doug.
Fantastic. We have, besides Barb, we have 5 speakers that I believe are all based in the US, except for Carrie's company is based in Canada, though she's largely based in the US, but they're all working internationally, and hence the theme around getting the global tribe together. First, we have Katy Sinnott. She's Vice President of Global Trade and Investment with the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. Katy works with a lot of international companies, and so we really appreciate, Katy, you being part of this conversation today. She's worked as a consultant in Hong Kong for McKinsey and Company. So along with all of the different things that she's done in her career, she definitely has the global stamp, and she's definitely a key member of the global tribe. She has a BS in finance. She went to college at the University of Wisconsin in La Crosse. And so we have 2 people from Wisconsin today. So go Badgers, go whatever's appropriate, and definitely stay warm today. Would you like me to introduce everybody, or would you like to go case by case?
Why don't you go ahead and introduce everyone, Doug? That would be great.
Okay, that would be super. I'd like to then introduce the next, I'm not sure this is the order of speaking, but somebody that I actually know very well, or at least, I just love her to death, Jeanine Jerkovic. I met her many, many years ago when she worked for the Canadian Consul General in the state of Arizona. And now she's Economic Development Director for the City of Surprise. And I think before she took that role, not many people really knew Surprise, Arizona, but the city has grown tremendously. And I noticed, Jeanine, there was just an article just literally days ago by the Business Journal about Jeanine and the work that she's done and how she's transformed particularly the global expansion of a city that you would never have thought would have anything really much global about it, a lot of residential areas. And Jeanine, through her background, has brought in the global aspect very successfully, and also the entrepreneurial aspect by setting up an incubator in the city of Surprise. So Jeanine, we'll just continue the great work. Thank you for taking the time today, and thank you for your long time support and collaboration. Our next speaker and our next person on the panel, again, maybe not the speaking order, is Stephanie Agee. She serves as Vice President of International Trade with VDEP, which is the Virginia Economic Development Partnership. Really a longtime member of Global Chamber in that region. And as I have been able to meet different economic development organizations in the US and around the world, I think of VEDP as one of the premier ones, along with WEDC, by the way, in terms of their international connectivity, the number of people they work with around the world, and the quality of professional help that they provide the local companies to help with exporting, but also on the foreign direct investment side, and support them as they land in their area. So Stephanie has worked in, as you might expect, being in the Washington, D.C. area, has worked in government activities, primarily around international export. She's got a master's of public policy degree from University of Maryland, and a BA in international studies and political science from Virginia Tech. So she is definitely a regional person there while she wears her global hat. And then Carrie Cole, a little bit different a speaker here today because she brings in the technology aspect, but Gazelle.ai largely has grown through the work of economic development. Gazelle is an extraordinary technology product that helps using artificial intelligence to identify fast-growing companies. So it basically kind of searches the internet, finds companies that have a lot of activity, and then starts to predict which are the ones that are worth working with, which are the fast-growing ones, really, at the end of the day, so that they're probably going to be interested in helping and support. And so that technology tool has been used in economic development over the last 5 years, and now even private companies are starting to use it to identify companies that are the ideal ones to work with, the ones that are growing and the ones that need help. So Carrie, thank you for your help and support. The company is based in Montreal, but Carrie, I think are you in Birmingham, or where are you located?
Yeah, I'm in Alabama, close enough, not necessarily Birmingham, but the Southeast for sure.
Very good. So you're by nature a cross-border gal because of your activities and working for a company that is not only in another country, but helps companies find companies that are all around the world. And one of the great evolutions for Gazelle has been, I remember 3 years ago, it largely was a US focused, or a lot of the data was US focused. Now it has data all over the world, and particularly the last few years, a lot of data on European countries or European companies. And now the Asia portion is growing as well. So thank you for joining us, Carrie. And then finally, Holly Milburn Smith is a project lead for the City Hub and Network for Gender Equity. It's called CHANGE. So it's the acronym CHANGE. It's in the office of Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti. The work that she's doing is the first international network of cities focused on advancing gender equity in local government and city policies. And so again, a little bit different from the other speakers today, but also very engaged with global cities, global businesses. And Holly, you originally you went to, when I read this, Transylvania University, I was thinking, wow, hey, she's very global, but Transylvania University is in Kentucky, as it turns out. You yourself have had quite a bit of international experience. And so thank you for bringing that to the table as well. And a lot of the social work activities that you've done I really appreciate it, especially with the New York State prison system, where state that I'm from. Fortunately, haven't had to go to the prisons yet, but appreciate all of the work there. So that kind of kicks us off. We've got 5 great speakers and 1 extraordinary moderator. Let's go, Barb. What do you think?
I think we're ready to rock and roll, Doug. Thank you so much. And welcome to all of our viewers that are joining us today. I want to start off with a question, and I'm going to pick on Katy first. Katy and I used to work together at WEDC, and I truly value the leadership that Katy brings. We rely on Katy and her WEDC team very frequently as it relates to foreign direct investment, exports, and just activities around the globe. In fact, we have 3 events happening yet this week that we're engaging with Katy's team. So, as we all know, that there's a tremendous power in all learning from one another. I'm sure throughout all of your careers, you have had both men and women mentors. Because today's focus is on global women leadership, can you discuss with us a period of your time in your work life when you've noticed maybe different standards or expectations or treatment between men and women, and how your mentors in your life help you understand and address those? So Katy, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Barb. I guess I was really blessed to have a great mentor early on who remains a friend for now 30 years. So that has helped me throughout my professional development. But when I think about different standards or expectations or treatment between men and women, I have many examples, sure. I've worked much of my life in historically male-dominated industries like banking and strategy consulting. So at some level, I always knew that there were different standards. That being said, some of the most striking examples that I noticed as a young woman are twofold. One that impacted me directly were the double standards around the appearance of women in the workplace, or the unwritten rules around the focus on women's appearance. Yeah, I have several examples of this. For example, I recall being told when I first joined one of my jobs in Hong Kong that I couldn't wear trousers to work. This was in the 90s. And I thought she was joking, but in fact, she wasn't. And what I did is I brushed it aside and said that I was hired for my skills and not for what I wear. Absolutely didn't change my behavior. And what was interesting is I became one of the first women to wear pants in that organization. And as you can imagine, many followed suit quickly thereafter. And my mentor joined shortly after I joined this company. And she and I kind of blazed a trail through the company to ensure that women could wear whatever was business appropriate. In another job, I have to admit that I was told not to wear makeup as it made us look, the word they used was much worse than hussies. And they actually said that to a group of women, and that we should wear glasses to look much smarter because we didn't look smart enough without glasses. Again, I discussed this with my mentor, and she and I have always taken the attitude that, you know, these are unwritten rules and that we should follow our own guidance. But this wasn't easy because we were frequently called out by our managers for not following these rules. And the one thing that I didn't do then, which I would do now, is to speak to senior management against these double standards. I know that my mentor did that in our previous job together. But at that time, I really believed that the feedback would not be well received at best, and at worst, it could put my job in jeopardy. Today, I don't believe that would occur. I believe that this feedback would be well received because I think there's really a greater awareness about equity in the workforce. Some of the other different standards that all of us have seen or experienced is in senior leadership and board membership. The majority are men, and typically there's a lack of diversity in that. And when you don't see yourself in leadership roles, it's disheartening and makes it harder for you to believe that you could be there. I think that we are winning this battle. We can see that there are significant changes in the United States and greater awareness around diversity, equity, and inclusivity in the world. So I feel hopeful for that, and that awareness is key. And really, that is what my mentor has always taught me, is to try to communicate. Although as my younger self, I don't think I was quite as brave as I am today.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie, for your comments. Next, we'll go to Carrie. And, Carrie, with a Gazelle, I will say we have it at New North, and it's a very, very powerful tool. One of our goals into 2022 is to just make sure we're using all of our research tools to its fullest extent. So Carrie, in your current role and perhaps working with economic development partners that are utilizing your platform, can you also describe, the mentors that you've had and how you might have addressed inequities, gender inequities?
Absolutely. And thank you. And it's funny, Katie, you mentioned a lot of the key points that I was going to mention. And so we might hear this a lot today, that we all have very similar stories, very similar ideas of what we've had to go through. I'm thankful, Katie, that women like you have kind of trailblazed a bit, and I do believe it's gotten a lot better, but these kind of differences and standards that women have to uphold still exist today. I mean, we've had these type of double standards since we were born. We've all known that we have to be on different sports teams, different standards of beauty, different standards of behaviors and manners. So it's not really a surprise that that can enter the workplace as well. My key point when I think of this question really comes into what Katie also touched on, is how representation matters. If you want to see more women in global leadership, if you want to see more women in business, when you look around the room, oftentimes it's hard to find people that look like you or just other women in general. So that being said, I've been very thankful for the mentors that I've had in my life, both men and women. I've been not only encouraged to grow to a leadership within this company and other opportunities before this to get me here, but I've also been encouraged and put in situations that would get me here. It's not just a, hey, you're doing a great job. They've put me into circumstances that allowed me to grow, allowed me to prove myself, and allowed myself to be in the conversations that aren't typically open to others previous to me, I guess. I guess if I were to have any sort of, suggestions to women, it would be that, we need to speak clearly, know that you are allowed to be in this room, know that your representation matters and that you deserve to be there. And to me, that's my biggest takeaway, is being confident and again, knowing you're allowed to be in the room and you deserve to be there.
Great. Thank you so much, Carrie.
Mhm.
Next, we'll move to Stephanie, addressing gender inequities and your mentors and how you've addressed those.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's really interesting to hear the other comments so far, and I definitely, they all resonate very, very much with me. But one thing as I was thinking about this idea, I feel very lucky in that even from a very young age, I wasn't conditioned to see the world through a gender lens. It just wasn't something my parents talked about. It wasn't something that came up a lot for me. Sure, there were differences between the boys and the girls growing up, but I wasn't conditioned to think about my own potential in the world as a result of my gender. My parents just expected a lot of me no matter what. And I grew up with a sister, so I didn't have another boy in the pack to have to contend with. But even as I was growing up, going through school and then going through college, girls and women, including myself, were the smartest students in the class. And that was consistent across every educational experience I had. So there wasn't a way for teachers to have any justification for holding back girls, holding back women as I went through school. And I think that has continued and has followed me through with my entire career, in fact. So I just didn't think about it that way. It didn't really come into play in my thinking about whether or not I was could be considered for a promotion, for a next role. So I feel very lucky around that. But on the other hand, of course, there are different things that women have to contend with. And appearance, as has been mentioned, that's a huge one that I think about. The amount of time that we are either expected to, and many of us end up spending on our appearance is, what more could we be doing with that time if we were men? What great things could we do with that extra 30 minutes to an hour of the day? So I think about that sometimes, but again, it's been with me my entire career. It is what it is. And I've just sort of dealt with it and moved on. I do think something that hasn't been mentioned yet, but I have a feeling other women on this panel would agree with me. There's this difference in expectations about how women handle themselves in a professional social setting, right? So like networking, after hours events, work travel, when you're traveling either with colleagues, with clients, with other stakeholders. And it's sort of, well, you want to be there to make connections, to be a part of the networking, but how do you act when you're there? If you stay too long, do you drink too much? Do you drink too little? Do you laugh at the jokes or do you not? Because a lot of the men around you are making jokes that they're very comfortable with each other, but then they're not necessarily changing what they're saying because a woman's in the room, and maybe you don't want them to either because you want them to be comfortable with you there. But it's all of these kinds of things you have to think about that I don't think are, definitely not something that the males in the room typically have to contend with. Now, thinking through mentors, I mean, I've had wonderful mentors, both men and women. I will say more men than women, honestly. But just like I talk about growing up and with my parents and how they treated me treated gender, I feel like my mentors have kind of done the same thing. It's sort of, we just have high expectations of you because we've seen great things already coming from you, and we can see great things in your future. So just go forward and don't think about how your gender is going to hold you back. And I feel, again, very, very lucky. I don't mean to suggest that there aren't differences and there aren't considerations to be made as a woman and different expectations set. It's just something that I've been able to move past in most situations.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. And you had referenced you have a sister. I grew up with 5 sisters, no brothers. And so because of that too, our parents instilled in us really not looking at through a gender lens, similar to what you said. So thank you for sharing that. Jeanine, we're going to go to you. I feel like I should do this surprise each time.
I love it.
Jeanine is on screen, right? Instead of a hand jazz, it's a surprise. So thank you for sharing your comments, Jeanine.
Hopefully it's a pleasant surprise. So, I really appreciate all the comments, and Stephanie, I resonate with everything you're saying. I feel very fortunate. I think because we stand on the shoulders of giants, we've just had so much, of the way, generationally speaking, we've had so much paved, in the past. A lot of ground has been broken. And I think we're very lucky to be at this kind of, phase where, we've been able to have all of the advantages that our predecessors hoped that we would have. And of course, there are still challenges. But, one of the things, and I was thinking about this question more from a global perspective, language and culture are incredibly different and incredibly important. And between men and women, sometimes there's a language and a cultural difference. And I think we owe it to, our male coworkers, our bosses, our, subordinates, whoever, our male coworkers and clients and so forth, to help them understand our language, and we have to understand their language. And I think that's, and their culture, and they have to understand our culture. And I had a recent example of this, and maybe it's a little bit off topic, but about 2 months ago, we finished a round of job interviews. And we had 6 candidates, 2 were men, 4 were women. And of the 4 women, so the question for all the candidates was, tell us about a time you had a challenge in your workspace, and how did you deal with it? How did you deal with conflict? And, a lot of the answers were what you expect, but both of the women, or two of the 4 women, answered right out of the gate, well, I just went right to HR. And, and I think that kind of resonates to, I think, a point that, sometimes you can't call the fairness police. We have to find our language, and we have to be able to communicate effectively to, our colleagues. If something makes you uncomfortable, there's a way to comment on that. And I think, Katy, your example was amazing. Finding your strength and finding your courage and words to say, this is really, a little strange, and here's how I think it should be. I think that's really important, and that's very powerful. So I think, I'll leave it there. I think it's really a matter of, intercultural communication to some extent, and, finding our words and helping our male coworkers and so forth find their words.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeanine. Our office is in Green Bay, and I am a Packer shareholder, which is really just a piece of paper of pride. So I have to throw this out there, Holly, that I hope I come out to LA soon for the Super Bowl. So I'll look you up and we'll go for lunch. So Holly, why don't you wrap up this first question for us?
Thanks, Bob. And I look forward to seeing you. I hope we can connect when you're in LA. I think I might take it in a slightly different direction because your question reminds me of an experience I had right at the beginning of my career. In college, I worked part-time in an office, and just before graduation, my boss called me in and very generously, offered, how can I help you? You've been such a hard worker in this office. I would love to help you in this next phase of your career. And then he said something that stuck with me for years. He said, I just find that you have such a remarkably gentle nature. And he meant that as a compliment. But at the time, I was in my early 20s, and I was like, gentle? I'm not gentle. I'm bold and I'm ambitious and I'm going to go take on the world. And I was so resentful for quite a while because I thought, I'd worked for this guy for 3 years and he's so wildly mischaracterized my personality. And after some self-reflection over the years, I realized that that perhaps there was some truth to that. And actually, before I began working for government, I worked in the social work field, and that quality of my nature and my leadership through empathy and compassion was actually a huge strength. And what that self-reflection and kind of coming around on that experience really pointed out to me is that the fact that I couldn't reconcile my innate characteristics with what I believed to be those of traditional leaders was not his fault, and was actually my own internalized misogyny. And for me, that was a really revealing kind of reflection to come upon, because it made me realize that so much of the work that we have to do is external and is fighting the systems and the perceptions that have had such an impact on and have inhibited women's ability to rise into leadership roles, but also the internal things that we have to unlearn about ourselves and about other women. And so that was a meaningful experience there. And I think that we're also living in a time where we're kind of collectively unlearning a lot of those messages about traditional gender roles and what makes a leader effective. And I think that agreeing with Kathy and with Carrie that representation is so important in this way, because it helps create a more expansive view of what leadership can look like. I don't think all women bring the same characteristics to leadership roles, but the diversity of experience that we can bring and how that impacts our leadership, I think is a huge gift. And things like rigid traditional gender standards hurt everyone. They don't just hurt women, they hurt men too. I know that we know that men are less likely to seek medical help because of ideas that we have deeply embedded in our society about masculinity. And so creating this kind of more expansive view of what a leader can look like through our own authentic selves and lived experiences, I think is a huge lesson that I've learned in my career.
Great. Thank you so much, Holly, for those insightful comments. We're going to move to our next question, and some of this might have been addressed in what you all just said, but if there's anything additional, we all know in your roles of leaders in the area of trade and handling COVID, managing regional economic economies, globalization, and many other changes that you all navigate every day. Can you share what great global leadership looks like to you, and if you feel you handle this differently based on your gender? Carrie, we're going to start with you.
Thank you. I do think that this can kind of bring up some of the points that we just kind of talked about in the first question, particularly what Holly just mentioned. It's kind of dead on in what I was thinking. the idea that there's not a one size fits all. Having more women or different types of personalities in leadership will only provide, you know, more of an idea of what leadership can look like. I absolutely love that, Holly. Thank you for sharing. So yeah, when I think about that, a lot of it doesn't really come down to gender. Of course, I'll go back to representation matters. I'd love to see more women in global leadership roles, but to me, a great leader in global leadership would have to look, you know, be someone who's very conscious. I particularly respond well in global leadership to empathetic leaders. I want people that would want to stay curious for more. How this has impacted us, Doug kind of touched on this before. I live in Alabama, I'm in the US, but we're a Canadian-based company. And COVID has only really emphasized how we're dealing with people in multiple locations. So everybody's working on our 60-person staff team at their houses. And we've had to be a bit more responsive, creating a company culture that is inclusive to everybody. People are a lot more, I guess, open and sharing things that aren't necessarily going well for them mentally. You know, COVID brings on a lot of different stresses. One way that we've managed that is, of course, letting people working from home. We're managing different time zones. You know, we've also kind of gotten to the point where we tried to respond a lot more quickly to things in leadership that maybe were brushed under the rug pre-COVID. We have people working from India right now because she hadn't seen her family in 3 years because of COVID. We have another person on my team working for Venezuela for the same reasons. And I just think leadership, especially with global leadership, I think a great leader is a person that is managing different cultural norms, has a strong sense of self-awareness to know quickly and easily when to say he or she is wrong. And again, kind of pivot and work with people. I think that's the biggest thing that we're seeing with COVID when it comes to global leadership is the ability kind of to pivot and adjust.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you so much, Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to move to Stephanie. Your comments on how you may handle your global leadership responsibilities a little bit different based on gender.
Sure. Well, first, just, let me just state what I see, what global leadership looks like. And this is whether you're an individual or even if you're a region or state like we are and thinking about our country, even, how do you display global leadership? And for me, it's all about engagement. It's about engaging in the world, not being afraid of it. You can't be a leader in the world if you are, if you don't commit to diving in and engaging with people, regions, states, countries, actors around the world, recognizing that your community, whoever you're representing, you're part of the global community. Even if you think of yourself as a region inside the United States, you are still a global actor in our very globalized world and globalized economy. So what you do or what you don't do, it matters and it has an impact on the world, on the globe. You can choose to see it that way or you can choose to ignore it, but it doesn't matter. You are having an impact. And so you have to think about, if you step up and say, well, I want to be a global leader, well, then you have to think about engagement and how are you engaging in that world. And I think, for me, for the United States, thinking about, about global leadership from a US perspective and where that can be important when it comes to international trade, since so many of us are engaged in that work. I just, that's again about engagement. It's about the world being better off when the US as a country is engaging in writing and enforcing rules of global trade. And I think that's just one example. I think the same is true for a region that wants to engage in the global economy. Well, you have to be a part of the conversation if you want to help. If you want to help write the rules, if you want to help encourage companies to come to your locality, if you are helping businesses in your community go outbound, it's all about engagement. And I think engagement looks different. It can look different based on gender, but no matter what, I think, we are all better off when a diverse set of voices, personalities, approaches are represented in discussions about anything that's important in this world, whether it's COVID, whether it's trade, whether, so many different topics. We're just better off when there's more representation at the table. And I think that's absolutely true when it comes to international trade. So, and when it comes to global discussions of global leadership, women and men tend to bring different methods and approaches, Not saying that all women do things the same or have the same approach, or all men have the same approach. But the point is just that there are some differences. There can be a gentler nature, a more conversational nature, as with women sometimes. So having both voices and even more diversity represented in ways other than gender is just super important when it comes to to topics, really anything that's important and anything that covers that is a global issue. So that's my point, is just that both need to be at the table in order for the best approaches to come and the best solutions to be brought up to any problem.
Great, thank you so much, Stephanie. In our office, we have a saying called kaku, and that is a Hawaiian reference to we're all in this together. And so when we have stressful moments within our office. With COVID, we're a little bit more spaced out for those that are physically here, and some are working from home. We'll just kind of chime in cuckoo, and it kind of sounds like a bunch of birds just being very happy, but we're being ever mindful too, that we are all in this together, whether it's building your community, building your region, addressing issues around the world. And so thank you, Stephanie, for sharing those remarks. We are going to move to Jeanine to talk about how you may handle your leadership responsibilities based on gender.
It's a great question. I'm going to speak very generally, and this is not always the case, but I find male leaders tend to be more big vision and outcome driven. And I always find female leaders tend to be more connections driven. And I think for that reason, I think you're seeing a lot of women in economic development taking share. And because I always, in economic development, you have to make connections very quickly, and you have to relate to people very quickly, and be able to make very quick decisions. And I think in business, that you don't actually have to be likable sometimes in business. So there's a contrast. I think what I like in global leaders is something in between. I always like to see, people that are able to connect, but people that have big visions. So, I'm not sure if that's a great answer, but, I think as women, I think, maybe know your strengths, know your weaknesses, and have great mentors and work on that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeanine. Holly, let's move to you next.
Thanks. And I'm going to agree with a lot of what my colleagues have said here. But I certainly we need more women in leadership roles. But I've been thinking a lot lately about, why that is, because I don't necessarily believe that women by nature make better leaders for any number of reasons because of their innate nature or their chromosomes. I think our strength is in our lived experiences as women moving throughout a world designed for men that still treats non-male experiences as atypical. And I was thinking about that earlier this week because we just hired this really capable 22-year-old woman to manage changes data work. And one of my first thoughts, I'll admit, was, oh, great, she can help me with all this social media work that I don't want to do because she's 22 and she's probably great at it. But then, I caught myself, and I remembered, early in my career, when I was asked to, organize the retirement party, or come up with the client Christmas gift because, I was the woman, and no one said that explicitly, but everyone knew that was why. But these were tasks that fell outside of my job description that I wasn't being paid extra to do, but was consistently charged with doing because people thought as a woman I would do them better. So reflecting on that, I caught myself and thought, we didn't hire this woman to manage our Twitter. We hired her to manage our data. And if I expect her to do certain tasks outside of her job description because of her age, how is that different, than being asked to plan the retirement party because I'm the woman? So I think that for me highlighted one of the many ways in which our biases, even as women, can be harmful, even if, there's no ill intent. And so I think, with our lived experiences, we need to be especially reflective on those experiences so that we don't perpetuate kind of these bad patterns of behavior that exploit or take advantage. And then the only kind of other point I wanted to make to your question, Barb, was that my boss, Deputy Mayor Nina Hachigian, I think makes this rather astute point that in order for the US to remain competitive on a global scale, especially when compared to countries with workforces that are 2 and 3 times our size. We really need every American realizing their full potential. And so when sexism or ageism, in my case, or racism inhibits someone from realizing their full potential, it not only harms that person, but it harms our economy. And so I think as non-male leaders, we need to bring our full authentic selves and our lived experiences to the role and think critically before, perpetuating that same behavior that maybe previous male leaders that we've worked under have done to us.
Great. Thank you so much, Holly. And Katy, we're going to have you wrap up this round of questioning as to how you make your decisions, your leadership decisions based on gender.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Barb. And I agree with a lot of what has been said. I guess I would just kind of look at what I see is great global leadership. And it isn't necessarily gender-based, which I think Stephanie alluded to. And I think it's important to remember that. But for me, it's to be thoughtful, empathetic, flexible, and measured while being culturally aware. And the way I do those types of things with my team is I always try to listen. It's not always easy, but it's important to hear first, particularly if you're working in another country where you haven't had a lot of experience, to understand what the team is telling you. Also, another thing I do a lot is I constantly remind myself that there are many paths to the same answer. There are many ways to get to a solution. And it's important as a good leader to not interject yourself into this process. Even though you think you would take a different path, it might be in your mind faster. But in the end of the day, when I haven't interjected myself, I have seen some surprising results, right? And so I try to be less hands-on and not do that. And last, I think Jeanine said it is, be yourself, embrace your style, and you don't have to always be liked. I think that's something that women are concerned about quite a bit. Is I've had young female managers who say, well, what if they don't like what I said? It doesn't matter. If you believe that you're saying the right thing and you've been thoughtful about your decision process, or you feel that something has been done wrong, I think it's important to embrace that and to be more willing to not be liked. I think that is something that women struggle with in general around the world. It isn't unique to American women. I have seen it all over the world. So that's really, really important. I've worked in many countries where women are never in leadership, and I had to lead all male teams. And I had team members with me that people would talk to them instead of talking to me, even though I'm standing there. And you have to learn how to work within that and be really flexible. So, there are so many challenges that women would face, good or bad, around the world. But I also think, I can't recall who said it, maybe Holly, is when we think about in our own economic development roles, our impact on the global world, you would think maybe regionally you wouldn't have, but I know Barb has impact globally. She helps companies export, etc. And even in my role, we talk a lot about a lot of federal issues. So many countries will come to us, their consul generals, and they'll want to know the state's opinion, even though it's a federal issue. So, this is not necessarily a gender issue, but we do have a lot of impact globally. So we have to take that role really seriously and not let our gender get in the way. Barb?
Great. Thank you so much, Katy. I think what we'll do is we have 2 questions left, but your responses have been phenomenal. So thank you so much. I think we're going to kind of include your thoughts and goals for diversity, equity, inclusion into this next question as well. And I say that, I used to always say DEI, and we have some initiatives too. And I was told that I was saying it wrong, that it should be EDI. If you lead with equity, diversity and inclusion will automatically follow. So we will include your thoughts with regard to your goals for EDI activities moving forward. So the question is, we're going to start with Stephanie. As great leaders, I know we're always in search of improvement of ourselves, improvement of our teams, improvements of our community, improvements around the globe. As we fast forward to 2025 and we take a look back at COVID, we know that there's been challenges, but there's also been some brilliant learning opportunities and growth. In fact, in our office, again, those tense moments, we say improvise, adapt, overcome. And for those of you that are Clint Eastwood fans, that was a reference that he used in one of his many movies. And so we know it's been a year of improvising, adapting, and overcoming situations. So the question that I have for all of you is, do you feel you will see more or faster progress with gender balances under the understanding of equity, diversity, and inclusion and collaboration? And what are your goals for 2022 in those particular areas? So Stephanie, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, thanks for that. I'm just a hopeful person by nature, sort of glass half full all the time. Every hopeful bone in my body, though, has been tested by the last 2 years. But still, even going through it, and now maybe not coming out of it, because I can't say that we're coming out of this. But as we continue to move through it and get a little more used to what we've been dealing with, I feel like there's a lot of reason for hope. In gender equity, in empathetic leadership and things like that. So let me just give you some examples of what I'm seeing. I mean, when this all first started, when the pandemic first started, I saw the mothers that work with and for me, and fathers too, but at first it really seemed to be pressing on the mothers. How do I handle what's expected of me being on this computer all day, every day in my home? And now my children, are here, and I've got to manage their schoolwork, and I've got to, they've got to be in the same space with me throughout the day. And they were dealing with that, as well as just the uncertainty and fear that the pandemic brought to all of us, no matter whether we had kids or not. So I had doubts at times about what was that finally going to look like. And it was hard to see hope at that time. But now I'm seeing so much more focus on the balance of childcare between two working parents. Seeing the embrace of working from home as businesses and organizations have seen how well that can work and how much balance that brings to the lives of working people, whether, again, parents or not. And so I see that, and I think that we're going to see more of, and I'm very hopeful for what that will result in going forward. I think, another part, I mentioned, it's been, I think somebody mentioned this term before, it might've been Holly, but empathetic leadership. There's been a great focus on that. It's something I've been trying to focus on and display myself with my own team. And the idea that we as leaders can set very high standards and expectations for our teams, but at the same time, be empathetic regarding their struggles. What are they facing? Asking them not, did you meet your numbers this month, but how are you doing? What can I, as a leader and this organization, do to make this job better, to make working conditions better, so that you can thrive in your position and in your working life? And I've seen a lot more leaders talking about that, a lot more reporting about this as a concept, and it's been great to see. And I've seen it displayed in the leaders who lead me, and I've been, again, trying to put that forward with my team as well. So that's definitely something I want to continue to press on with in 2022. In terms of DEI or EDI specifically, as many organizations did, the EDP had a big wake-up call around this topic in 2020 and 2021, and we have taken a hard look at ourselves, looking at ourselves even further going forward and saying, do we reflect the community that we work for and are supposed to be represented? We said, no, we don't think we do. What are we missing as a result? How are we, and how is this Virginia economy that we are here to support suffering without us even being truly aware of it? So I won't go into details on that. We're looking at our strategy. We've got a lot of work to do, and I will absolutely admit that. But I'm excited that we're having the conversations. I'm excited that we're working towards this as something, as a priority that we as as a leadership team in our organization have decided we're going to work on, but those who lead us and guide us, our board, our outgoing governor's administration and incoming governor's administration, all want us to be focused on this. So we will be doing a lot of that work. We'll see what comes out of it. It's not going to be a one-year process. This is going to be a very long-term thing for us, but it's definitely a big goal for us in 2022.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Jeanine, we'll go to you next. If you can just comment on the progress of gender balances and EDI activities and your goals for 2022.
And I'll be really brief. So I've been noticing just for the last couple of years in the economic development world, the site selection process is not just driven by real estate anymore. There's always been workforce considerations, don't get me wrong, but I've been seeing more and more the HR director or chief human services officer or what have you is at the table making that site selection decision, making sure that our communities are compassionate, that we have a focus on diversity initiatives. So I think that's been a big game changer. And I think they're seeing a consumer market. And I think I'm a Gen Xer, but the Gen Z generation, the millennial generation, they put their money where they vote with their dollars. And if a company is greenwashing, they'll know it. If a company is just saying something and doing something else, they will call them out on it. So I think you've seen this groundswell and this change in company behavior. And I think our goal is to be better stewards of those initiatives, but also be a better steward of our corporations in our community. They're struggling for ways to connect to the community. So from a business retention and expansion perspective, we're working on ways to better connect them to their workforce, to find better tools, better language to reach workers, reach consumers, and the global market.
Great, thank you so much, Jeanine. Holly, we'll go to you next, and your comments on gender balances and understanding EDI activities and your goals for 2022.
Thanks, Barb. I have to say, Stephanie, you really struck a chord when you said how your capacity for hope has been challenged, because I can certainly relate. But, and truthfully, not to put a damper on it, but the data I've seen does present a pretty bleak picture for women. I mean, many of the global, almost all of the global gains around gender parity we've seen over the last half century have pretty much been erased by the pandemic. We saw lockdown measures that were, essential for, stopping the spread of the virus, contributed to far more women leaving the workforce than men, in part because women are disproportionately represented in service positions that stopped during the lockdown, but also because women were far more likely to leave the workforce to do care work when schools and daycares closed, and outsourcing things like elder care, was not an option during that time. And we also saw an increase in domestic violence as folks were forced to stay indoors. But I do have hope. I say that, but I do have hope, and I believe that hope is in a political praxis. I think it's necessary to sustain ourselves in a struggle that will long outlive us, the struggle for equality. And one of looking ahead for the City Hub and Network for Gender Equity Change, one of our guiding principles is that we believe cities have unique proximity to our residents. We have policy tools to really push the needle on global development goals and bring tangible benefits to our communities. So in November, Change published a toolkit that kind of shares a lot of the examples of our member cities. And that's where I find hope. I find hope in Barcelona, which is one of our member cities. They require gender impact reports on all urban development projects, on budgeting, contracts, and procurement. So before they do those things, they need to produce a report that understands and prevents how those projects may exacerbate gender inequality. London has effectively eliminated the gender pay gap in City Hall and is piloting an interesting menopause support policy for city employees. Buenos Aires is another partner city of ours, and they've created a digital map on their city website to help residents right there on their phones access caregiving resources. And Los Angeles has done incredible things. Tokyo, all the cities that we work with are doing really interesting work. And if you want to learn more about it, you can visit our website at citieschange.org and download that toolkit, because I have I have felt a lot of hope seeing what's possible when leaders are committed to gender equity.
Thank you so much, Holly. And again, that website is citieschange.org, correct? Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Katy, we're going to go to you for you to discuss the progress in gender balances and work in EDI and your goals for 2022.
Sure, we have many goals, right? But I think what gives me the greatest hope is that this is the first time I have seen in my lifetime such great awareness about the inequities in our cultures. And what Holly has just mentioned about all of the foreign countries and cities that are doing really hopeful things. I would like to see more of that in the US. I think many of our European and South American partners might be leading us in that and provide us many areas to work from and understand more and learn. If we look at more of a micro level, WADC takes diversity, equity, and inclusion very seriously. Last year, we participated in extensive course on diversity, equity, and inclusion through the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And all of these sessions started really important conversations within our organization and even within our team. So within our teams, we would talk about, how we have been impacted by inequities or lack of diversity. And that's really important because WADC sees itself as leading in this front. It's important as it's the first step because we want to give examples that our companies and our other fellow agencies can follow. So that's incredibly important. Additionally, we as a team looked at our own trade development programs for barriers to DE&I to ensure that everyone has equal access to our programs. This includes that we work with more diverse organizations to ensure that there's awareness of our trade programs in all communities. And it's an iterative process for us. Of course, we need to revisit and continue to make those efforts, but those changes make me hopeful. So,
Awesome. Thank you so much, Katy, for sharing that. And Carrie, we're going to have you take us home. This is the last question and the last presenter before we wrap up today's session. So please share with us what you see for changes in gender balance and EDI activities and your goals for 2022.
Absolutely. So I echo a lot of what was said earlier. I think although there was panic up front, I was one of them. And the first 2 weeks of working with my daughter running around were the longest 2 weeks of my life. But we all got through it. And I actually think the global pandemic allowed everyone kind of to come together, take a deep breath and kind of step back from the norm. And it allowed the conversations that weren't really brought up before the pandemic. Mental health, gender inequality, lack of diversity were all allowed the time that they weren't really given attention to before the pandemic. And for that reason, I'm hopeful that all of these kind of issues and conversations that have been propelled throughout the pandemic will make these type of initiatives work faster and again, be more at the forefront than they were previous to the pandemic. I'm happy that I work for a company that has always valued diversity and inclusion. We brag often on even our proposals in lead generation, working with economic developers, that we have a ton of different cultures and nationalities that work in our Montreal office. We speak 25 different languages. But just not only hiring people, but celebrating those differences has been a huge initiative that we've put forward throughout the pandemic. We've established 3 new committees within our company. Of course, there's a social committee, cultural committee, and then of course, inclusion and diversity. And things that we've done and continue to do throughout 2022 is we've done everything from a lunchtime cooking series to while we're sitting at home, we're celebrating the food from different cultures. We do country trivias, and these all might seem a bit kind of almost corny in some ways because I mean, they're work events that we're doing, but it allows a spotlight, it creates a stronger team. You see with people within your team that when their differences are celebrated, that you find that it strengthens trust within a company and with a team. And it's something that we've seen such high results from that we're definitely going to continue into 2022. The other thing that I think is really interesting from a data perspective, going back to Gazelle, which is also pretty interesting, kind of reflecting the initiatives happening in economic development around the world, is we had a huge request for all sorts of minority-owned businesses. So whether that's with business retention and expansion efforts or attraction, almost all of our subscribers within Gazelle were requesting that type of data. Women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, Black-owned businesses, you name it. It's a data point that they were using as initiatives, and I think that's really hopeful as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carrie.
Mhm.
Well, that brings our session to a close, and we really want to thank Jeanine and Katy and Carrie, Holly, Stephanie, for sharing your time and talents. I was incredibly honored to be moderating this panel, and you are all truly very inspiring women. So I want to thank you for sharing your comments this morning. So Doug, I'm going to kick it back over to you for a wrap up.
Very inspiring and some really great comments today. I've got a full page of notes and takeaways, and I'd like to maybe finish with just two quick comments. Number one is to recognize all of the attendees today. Thank you for taking the time to listen in to this important conversation. One of the attendees is U.S. Ambassador Sue J. Johnson Cook, who worked in 2 different administrations. She's a 3rd-generation business owner and a global business person, and she's come through Global Chamber. I appreciate, Ambassador, your being here, and also your comments about diversity in general, or at least my takeaway on this was, I remember when I started Global Chamber, I worked very hard to make sure there was gender balance in all the speaking opportunities, but also that there was diversity with different cultures and represented. I didn't do such a good job on that latter point here today, but it's certainly our intent always, as the speakers talked about, of getting diversity involved in really the processes that we have in business and all the things that we do. I will harken back then also on my last point is something that Katy said about sticking with, after you've thought through something, sticking with it and not necessarily knowing that you're going to be liked because of that decision. And what I harken back relates to the diversity issue. When I was a 27-year-old chemical engineer with the DuPont company, the bosses decided I was going to be the global guy for several different businesses, but nobody in Asia wanted me. I was way too young. And so my boss was an Hispanic woman, Ann Zaragoza, and her boss was Claiborne Smith, an African American. And in those days, that was fairly unusual to have people that in that position of that type. But they fought for me, this young white guy, to be this person. And I was in the back seat of a car with Ann Zaragoza, and she was basically arguing with the guy to say, look, this guy is really capable. He's already demonstrated his abilities. He should be given the chance, and he will be given the chance. Going back to what Katy said, she had thought about it. She was solid on it. Despite the fact that they were arguing against it and did not want me, she stuck with it. And the consequence of it was 35 years of international business for me, living overseas, starting Global Chamber. And so I think about Ann Zaragoza and Claiborne Smith a lot because they were thoughtful, they thought through, they believed in equity, and they believed in thinking about people and what they bring to the table, no matter what their clothes or their skin color or their religion or whatever. And that's certainly one of the driving forces that we believe at Global Chamber is let's just do the right thing. And talented people will step up and get it done. And I think what we saw today were 6 really talented people, Barb, you included, in having a conversation that was just off the charts. Thank you all for speaking today, all your comments, and thanks to the audience as well. Barb, any last comments that you'd like to make, and then we'll close down the room.
No, just thank you, Doug, and thank you to our esteemed panelists. Everybody, make it a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all so much.
Bye.
Thanks, Barb.
Great comments, guys. Thank you.